Hello and welcome to another lecture for History of Journalism at Temple University. I'm Professor Harper, and today we're going to take a brief look at civil rights and the role that the journalists played and the government played in terms of the civil rights activities in the 1950s and 60s, mainly to kind of set a baseline to understand the works like Brothers by Sylvester Monroe and Peter Goldman, my former colleagues at Newsweek magazine. So Brown versus the Board of Education started the ball rolling in the early 1950s when there was, racial segregation in public schools was the norm across America. And in Topeka, Kansas, a black third grader named Linda Brown had to walk a mile through a railroad switchyard to get to her black elementary school, even though a white elementary school was only 7 blocks away. And on May 17, 1954, Chief Justice Earl Warren read the decision of a unanimous court, which said, "We come then to the question presented. Does segregation of children in public schools solely on the basis of race, even though the physical facilities and other tangible factors may be equal, deprive the children of the minority group of equal educational opportunities? We believe that it does. We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal." In Montgomery, Alabama, there were a variety of things that happened in the South, and in 1952 there was segregation on interstate railroad cars. That was declared unconstitutional. In 1954, a similar judgment was made concerning interstate buses. And in 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, a bus boycott occurred when Rosa Parks, a tailor's assistant who was tired after a hard day's work, refused to give up her seat to a white man, and she was arrested. Martin Luther King, a pastor at the local Baptist church, helped organize protests against bus segregation. And in 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court forced the bus company to accept integration. In Little Rock, Arkansas, there was the use of the National Guard to stop children from attending the local high school in Little Rock. Essentially what happened was that the mayor asked President Eisenhower to send in federal troops, which he did, and the 101st Airborne was sent to protect 8 black children going to the Little Rock Central High School. In 1963, the famous March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, an estimated 250,000 to 400,000 people attended the march, and Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his famous speech, "I Have a Dream." Martin Luther King was key in terms of this period. In March 1968, he went to Memphis, Tennessee to support a sanitation workers' strike, and he made his famous speech, "I've been to the mountaintop," on April 3rd. And a sniper killed King the next day, and there were riots in more than 100 cities, and 46 people were killed. James Earl Ray finally pleaded guilty to the attack on Martin Luther King Jr. Malcolm X was also an important figure. He was born Malcolm Little and emerged as a key man in the Nation of Islam and became head of a mosque in Harlem. He was founder and editor of Muhammad Speaks, and he ran into some problems in 1963 when he was suspended from the Nation after saying that the assassination of JFK was a case of chickens coming home to roost. In 1964, Malcolm X left the Black Muslims and established his own religious organization, and he was assassinated by 3 members of the Nation in 1965. There were a number of efforts to deal with segregation on transportation, and this created the Freedom Riders. And in Anniston, Alabama, one bus was destroyed and riders on another were attacked, so that the U.S. Attorney General at the time, Robert Kennedy, sent in a special representative to accompany the riders, and he was beaten. Mississippi Burning, also an interesting movie, essentially revolved around CORE, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the NAACP to organize voters. 3 of the workers were killed, and in 1967, 7 members of the Ku Klux Klan were convicted under federal law. In Watts in 1965, 2 white officers arrested 2 African Americans for a minor vehicle violation in Watts. The local youth quickly surrounded the police car, and what happened was a 5-day riot that ensued with 24 people dead and property damage of more than $40 million. The Black Panthers grew out of a lot of the racial turmoil at this time. October 1966, Bobby Seale and Huey Newton formed the Black Panthers in Oakland, and the organization was formed to, quote, protect local communities from police brutality and racism. And there were about 2,000 members throughout the country. The FBI described the Black Panthers as the greatest threat to the internal security of the country, and over a period of several years, 24 Black Panthers were killed in gunfights with police. There were a variety of laws that came into being as a result of the racial turmoil. The Civil Rights Act of 1957, it created a section of the Justice Department to look at violations. The Civil Rights Act of 1960 allowed federal judges to appoint referees when people were denied the right to register and vote. The 1964 Civil Rights Act made racial discrimination illegal in public places. The law also required employers to provide equal employment opportunities. There were a variety of federal funds that could be cut off if there was evidence of discrimination. In 1965, LBJ persuaded Congress to pass the Voting Rights Act, and essentially the law removed the rights of states to impose restrictions on who could vote in elections.